G'day, I'm Owen, you've joined the pub test, and this is the 7th video in our Jack the Ripper victim series. If you're watching these as they get released, well, let's get straight into it. The next person on this list is the second official victim of Jack the Ripper, Annie Chapman. Now, she was born in 1841, and her father's last name was Smith, and her mother's maiden name was Chapman, which is interesting. They got married 6 months after Annie was born, which I think would have been scandalous possibly back in those days. Yet they had more children, but Annie was the oldest of the siblings. Now, it's said that Annie started drinking alcohol at a fairly young age. So as she's growing up, her younger siblings even are concerned about this habit and try to help her, but they say not with much result. The general consensus of Annie is she was really brilliant and could do almost anything when sober, but when affected by alcohol, well, things weren't so good. Now, the family moved away, but left Annie behind when obviously she was a bit older. Not that there was anything like really untoward there, it's just that it said that she had a job in service. So she was employed in housekeeping, and so it just made sense that she would stay and work because jobs were a premium back then. But it was in 1868 that she married John Chapman. Now, it is suggested that perhaps this was some relative of her mother's, but it's also possible that it was just a different person named Chapman because there were many Chapmans around at the time. But in 1870, they had their first child, Emily. They also had another daughter in the mid-70s. And then finally, in 1880, they had a son who was also named John. Now, they were known to be heavy drinkers. Whether or not that got them together, I don't know, but they were hooking into alcohol very, very solidly, despite the fact they were able to still carry on a relatively normal life. Their son, John, though, did have a disability, and this triggered them both to clean up their lives and stop drinking. And they were doing very well. But they couldn't look after John, and he had to go into a home for the disabled, which today I doubt would happen. There would be the supports, there'd be the help, but back then that pretty well much was the only option available. And then it was in 1882 their oldest daughter, Emily, passed away. This event triggered them both back to drinking very heavily. And in 1884, it said by mutual consent, they split up. Yet it is of note that John kept sending money to Annie, 10 shillings a week after the breakup. So she wasn't on the street. She wasn't destitute. And Annie sort of moved on with a bloke called Civvy, who used to make sieves. So I'm guessing that was a nickname of his because of the occupation he was in. But then at the end of 1886, the money stopped. So now Annie's making inquiries as to, hang on, where's this weekly cash that I've been getting? And she finds out that her ex-husband passed away on Christmas Day, 1886. And he died from cirrhosis of the liver and effects of heavy drinking. Well, when Civvy finds out the money stopped, he takes off. He just leaves Annie to herself. Now, how is she going to start making money? She does sell trinkets and flowers and just do the regular hawking on the street. Somewhere along the line, she does fall into working the streets for money. She is in a lodging house. I believe the name was Crossingham's Lodging House. And she was well liked there. Sometimes a couple of the guys there would pay for her room for the night if she didn't have the money. But there was also issues there too. Apparently there was a woman, Eliza Cooper, and her and Annie didn't really get along. It suggested that maybe there was competing affections for a bloke or something. But it was in September of 1888 that Eliza and Annie got into a fight, either at a pub over one of these blokes or at the lodging house over a bar of soap. Now, there are differing reports of what happened there, but there is definite fact that Annie ended up with a bit of a black eye, a bit of a shiner from this particular fight with Eliza. But it was the late afternoon on September the 7th, 1888, that Annie's not feeling very well. Now, she did have some health issues, and one of her friends checked in on her. But eventually Annie said, look, I can't sit here doing nothing. I've got to go out and make my money, or I won't have a roof over my head tonight. It's said that she returned to that lodging house at 11:30, and she had a bit of food, but she didn't have the money for the room yet. But at 1:35, she runs into the night watchman. So he's saying, look, need your money for your room, because she had a regular room at this lodging house. She said, look, I don't have it, but don't let it out, because I will be back with the money. And off she goes. But it was said that maybe she'd already had a beer or two before she got back to that lodging house, and that night watchman said, look, you find money to get your beer, but you can't pay for your room. But it was around 5:30 a.m. in the morning at 29 Hanbury Street that someone sees Annie with a bloke. And he's got a coat and hat on, apparently. And there's varying reports of the type of hat. So not long after the sighting of Annie, a bloke next door in 27 goes out to use the outhouse. So it's starting to get light now, but he hears some noise, hears someone say no, and then sounded like somebody falling. But there was a 5-foot fence, and he probably couldn't exactly see exactly what's going on, but, you know, things happened back then. He doesn't think anything more of it. But at about 6 a.m., a bloke who lived in 29 Hanbury Street with his family comes down and sees Annie, and yes, she has passed away. And she has been brutally murdered. The medical report states that no doubt strangulation occurred first, and then the rest of what the Jack the Ripper person did after that. It's of note, though, that the medical person also was extensive in his comments that Annie wasn't healthy. She was very malnourished. Her whole system was probably on the way of shutting down. Now, that does not justify the crime at all, but she was 47 years old. Her ex-husband had passed away from the effects of extreme alcohol use, and it seemed that she was not too far away from that happening to herself. Now, interestingly, the relatives did look after the funeral, but they made sure nobody knew about it. They made it very, very quiet, because this had made some major press. And so they managed to do the funeral in a very secretive way, which I think you could understand, because this was starting to turn into a media circus. But they find a leather apron underneath the tap. So someone had been trying to wash a leather apron right near where the crime happened. And it belonged to a bloke by the name of John Richardson, and the police went through him like a dose of salts. But they find that he had nothing to do with it. His mother had just tried to wash his leather apron. But the press picked up on this leather apron story, and they ran with, "We have to catch leather apron." So this media reporting led to the arrest of John Pfizer, who was known as Leather Apron. And particularly he was known as that by Sergeant Thick, and we actually covered that in the very first video that kicked off this Jack the Ripper series. But it also led to the arrest of other people. Many, well, I won't say many, but about 5 to 6 people at least got dragged in for questioning over this particular crime and the one before it, because the media attention on it now was really putting the pressure on the police. And what is also interesting, that there was pressures coming from other areas. You see, the local authorities were saying, we need more police. We got to catch this bloke. No one's safe anymore. So, get more police on the streets. And the police were saying, well, how about you fix your lighting? There's no point of having the police out on the street if we can't see a thing. And both the problems cost money. The local authorities said, well, it costs too much money to fix the lighting. And the police were saying it costs us a lot of money to put more police on the streets. So things really haven't changed today, have they, when departments start blaming each other and trying to pass the buck? But this was an escalation in the public's mind about these crimes happening. And it was after this event that many papers were being sold and letters were starting to come into the papers with information about this person who was the perpetrator of these atrocities. So who is the next person then on this list? So let me know what you think about this one down in comments. Like, Annie Chapman wasn't on the streets for all that long. I'm imagining around 5:30 a.m. at that time of the year, it was getting a bit lighter. So how could she get attacked in that backyard and no one really notice a thing? I mean, it does raise questions in my mind a little bit. But as always, thank you very much for watching. It genuinely is appreciated. Give that subscribe button a good hit. Find it, smash it. I'm Owen. You've been watching The Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one.